report released yesterday into war crime allegations in Afghanistan. I'm joined now by the Minister for Defence Personnel and Veterans Affairs, Darren Chester. Darren Chester, thanks for your time this morning. What appalled you most about that report?
Well, I think, Paul, the first thing to acknowledge today is to all our serving men and women and our veteran community is acknowledge them and say quite simply to them, thank you for your service to our nation. Well, throughout our nation's history, Paul, 2 million people have put on the uniform. They're the first people we turn to when things get tough, whether it's a conflict situation or a peacekeeping mission or humanitarian aid like we saw with the bushfires or COVID-19. So what they don't need today is our judgment. They need our support. They need to know we've got their backs, just as they've had our backs so many times in history. So I think it's very important we recognise that their service should not be diminished by the actions of what seems to be a small number of people, but these are serious allegations. They're very serious allegations, and the Chief of Defence Force spoke about that yesterday, about how we need to make sure we address these cultural issues and ensure that the people, though, who have been alleged to have committed these offences are given the opportunity to defend themselves in terms of the right to the presumption of innocence, but we need to go through that process now as well. But look, there's no escaping the fact, Paul. Yesterday was a very dark day, and we need to make sure that we've got the backs of our serving men and women and their veterans and the families who support them in that service, because they have a rich history of service in this nation.
How can those criminal investigations be exemplary if those accused of wrongdoing are still in active service, as we heard yesterday?
Well, the point that we all need to understand, Paul, is we've gone through a process where the Army called this inquiry, called this investigation because of rumours and allegation. And now what we've seen is the inquiry has come back saying, well, there's credible evidence there that some of these alleged unlawful killings need to progress to the next stage. And when we say progress to the next stage, that's why the government has put in place this Office of the Special Investigator. So more evidence can be gathered and a decision made about whether any prosecution needs to follow.
The question is about those people still being
in a position.
Sorry, Darren Chester, we've got a lot to get through. The question is about those people still being in service. I know they're being reviewed case by case, but how can an investigation be good if they're still there?
The answer is exactly that. Well, the answer is exactly that, Paul. They need to have the presumption of innocence, so it's an operational matter for the Chief of Army and the Chief of Defence Force to decide what duties those people can undertake. But right now they're allegations and evidence is being gathered, and then a decision is made through this Office of Special Investigator whether there is enough evidence to proceed to a prosecution. So that is a normal process that occurs when people are the subject of interest in alleged wrongdoing. So I think they're entitled to that presumption, and I say from the outset, Paul, we want to be very careful as Australians today that we don't all leap to judgment, that we actually get a message to our serving men and women that we do have their backs, because as I said at the outset, they've had our backs so many times,
that was
even this year during the Operation Bushfire Assist.
We've heard you, Darren Chester, on that point, and that was made yesterday too, very clearly by the boss of the Defence Force. Just very briefly, one of our leading investigative journalists, Mark Willesee, has said that these criminal investigations might take up to a decade. Is that the time frame that you think might be accurate?
I haven't heard that many years, Paul. I think the level of complexity, the fact we're looking at historic allegations in a foreign country, in a war zone, will mean this will be very complex. There's no question about that. I've never heard that, the number of years allocated to it, but it's hard for me to guess. It'll take as long as it takes. Okay. I mean, the Chief of Defence Force made it clear yesterday, we want to get this right, we want to set the record straight, and I think he's the right person to be leading this work. Okay,
well, let's assume it's going to take quite a while. It is very detailed work and they have to go bit by bit. How, in the meantime, will the federal government structure and initiate the payments of compensation to victims' families?
Well, again, that was covered yesterday by the Chief of Defence Force, and that's a process we need to go through now. What we saw yesterday was the Chief releasing as much of the report as he could and indicating that the recommendations are supported. Now we have to action those recommendations, and that's a conversation which will occur at the highest levels of government to see how that is possible.
Is it important for you that
the government of Afghanistan?
Is it important for you that the compensation comes as quickly as possible for those families?
Well, the important thing for me, Paul, is around this issue of trust and respect and to try and make things right. And that's what the Chief talked about yesterday. So you need to work with the affected individuals in a foreign country, work with the government to ensure that we can maintain that relationship. And the point I'd make, Paul, is we need to understand that Over that course of 20 years in Afghanistan, there's a lot of good work done in terms of restoring better patterns of life for local residents, in terms of working with the Afghan national forces so they can look after their own security requirements. Yes, these are very damning allegations. Yes, they need to be fully investigated, but we need to understand a lot of people in our military did a lot of good work over many years, and I want to make sure that their record is kept intact throughout this process as well.
Yeah, and I'll ask you specifically about that policy of operations in a moment, but another one about the whistleblower in this case, David McBride. He's still facing a trial next year. What is the public interest in prosecuting this man?
Well, I think, Paul, it's only fair that given a case is before the courts, I can't really comment on a specific case, but more broadly I can comment in that you need to have positions in place or protocols, policies in place that allow people who have seen illegality or issues of concern to present them up the chain of command within the Defence Force. So that is the broader policy, and that's the broader issue that came out of the inquiry report yesterday, that there were some failings in terms of how people could report issues they were concerned about, and that may have led to the perpetuation of these alleged crimes. So I think that the broad policy, the point you're making is well made, but I really can't talk about an individual case. That'd be unfair to the individual involved.
Okay, just finally, moving just beyond the details of the report, what considerations have you given and your government to examining the policies of successive Australian governments and the military objectives in Afghanistan that eventually saw soldiers creating their own rules of engagement?
Look, I'm sorry, Paul, there's no way we're going to answer this one in 30 seconds. It's a big issue for us in terms of no government ever makes an allocation of military resources to a conflict zone lightly. We need to obviously understand the strategic implications of the time. We've got to look back 20 years, what was the government of the time and the coalition forces seeking to achieve in terms of reducing the opportunity for terror to be exported to the world. So that was an important policy consideration of that time. Improving the patterns of life for residents in that community as an occupying force and allowing women and children to get to school, obviously a good strategic outcome which was endeavoured to be achieved. So they're all very broad considerations. The only point I would make, Paul, is, obviously in my role as Veterans Affairs Minister, I'm very conscious of the fact that long after a conflict is over, people in my community, the community I work in, the veterans community, are still dealing with those issues. So we have veterans from World War II, 75 years after the event. We have veterans from Korea and Vietnam who have issues that we need to work with them on. So there is a long tail of these conflicts. The decision to deploy resources always needs to consider that these people may well be impacted in future generations to come, and as a grateful nation, and we are a grateful nation, we have obligations to look after them. And for those who are seeking a military career, they need to understand that service in the military is a good thing. We have a great culture of service in this nation. You are the people that keep us safe in tough times. We saw you in action here at home during the Operation Bushfire Assist. We relied on you in COVID-19. You are the first people we call on when things get tough, and we need to support you.
Darren Chester, thanks for your time. I suspect we might talk again about this matter as these issues play out. Thank you.
All the best, Paul. Thanks for your interest. Can I encourage anyone impacted, though, to reach out to the Open Arms service on 1800 011 046. Thanks, Paul.
We're showing that photo, those phone numbers now, Darren Chester. Thank you. So Defence Family Helpline is a good resource, 1800 624 608, or Open Arms, as the Minister said there, 1800 011 046, or Lifeline more generally if you need help, 13 11 14.